Hey everyone, Chuck with Functional Fly, and today's fly is going to be another old standby that I think you just can't do without. I always keep a fly box full of them, especially on those overcast, rainy, snowy days. They always produce, and that's a blue-winged olive. So today we're going to tie a classic dry fly version, and but we are going to tie it down a little bit small. So for those of you who have been learning on larger hooks and want to see how or if things change when you're tying smaller, then go ahead and pay attention, and maybe this will help. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the hook that we're tying on is a Partridge SLD2, which is a barbless dry fly hook in a size 18. And the thread that we're using is a uni thread in olive dun in an 8/0 or a 72 denier. We're going to start by tying in behind the hook eye, and winding to a point about halfway down the shank. And then I'm going to go ahead and come back for about half of that distance, maybe slightly less. And this does two things. It helps us make sure that we tie in at the right point for the wings, but also gives us a layer of thread to tie on so that the wing and other materials don't want to roll or slip on the bare shank. For the wings, I have a couple of blue dun hackle tips, and I'm going to go ahead and get those lined up. I want those hackle tips to be the length of the shank of the hook, including the hook eye. And what I've done on this is, rather than just strip away the extra fibers, you can see I've just trimmed them short. And the reason for that is that if you try to just rip those fibers away on a smaller quill, you may go ahead and you may just break the feather. So I'm going to tie those in, take a couple of turns, one more, and then I'm going to build a dam of thread in front. And that's going to help those wings prop up just a little bit. I'll use the tips of my scissors to help separate them. And then bring this up so you can see it. We're going to take a turn from the front, running between the feathers and around the back of the far side. And then do the opposite. This is called an X-wrap. Now notice I'm not freaking out if everything isn't perfectly in place here, because there's more steps that we're going to take in tying this fly. So all you want to do is just set the general position, and then as we work later on, we'll be able to get everything exactly the way we want it. I am going to come down here and trim away those excess fibers that would stick off the front. Now the wings are on there. And I'll come in and I'll trim the end of those quills. I want those to be fairly short, because we're going to build a taper back down to the tail. Now when you're doing a tail on a dry fly, if you take a look at the feather itself, you can see this center part here, which is much webbier. You don't want to have that on your dry fly tail. So what you can do is you can tie in on that area, but the part that extends off for the tail itself should be this finer, more individual filaments. So I'm going to stroke those fibers back a little bit, and then I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to cut 7 or 8 filaments. That way, if I lose 1 or 2, I'm not overly stressed about it. And I'm going to check their alignment to make sure that they're all more or less the same. I'm going to get down to about 5 or 6 here. And again, the length on these should be just like the wing. They should be the length of the hook shank, including the eye. And once I have those to the length where I want them, now I put them in the other hand and I take a look to see where I'm going to tie those in. And I want to tie them right off the end of where I completed the wing. So I'll take a couple of a couple turns of thread onto the bare hook down here. Double check that length. Trim it to the proper length where I want to tie it in. And then once I have that in, I hold those tail fibers up slightly so that they extend straight off the back when I wind them, and they don't wrap around the hook shank. And that's looking pretty good. Tail's maybe just a smidge long, but honestly, I don't mind that. Now it's time to put on the abdomen, and the material I'm using here is called a fine and dry. Don't have to use this specific one. The color I'm using is BWO. The important thing here is this is an area where, especially for smaller flies, I like the synthetic dubbings because as long as you work with them sparsely, you can see they really dub down quite snugly to the thread. And this is not something, especially when you're tying 18s, 20s, and 22s, where you want a lot of bulk there. All I want is just enough to barely cover the thread. So I'm going to make my turns, make sure I'm not driving that tail down. And I'm bringing that up, and you can see that there's some nice color variation with this dubbing. It's got some hints of like rust color and light and dark olive, and that's something I like to have because not many things in nature are just a solid color. All right, coming down the home stretch. Now I have my hackle feather, which I have pre-measured, and I have stripped the hackles from the bottom and trimmed it down. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but let me see if I stroke those fibers out. You can see I've pulled a little bit more off of the right side of that feather, and that's to help the hackle lay down as I wrap it. So now I'm going to set that quill in so that the side is resting right up against the side of the hook. I'm going to take 2 to 3 turns, maybe 4, to bind that in there. And then I'm going to look to see where this would come forward. I don't want it too close to the hook eye, so I'm going to trim a little bit of that away. Hold the wings back. And then bind the rest of that down against the hook on the front side of the wings. Now I have that ready to go. I'm going to take the hackle and I'm going to pull that straight up. And in doing that, now when I make my first turns, those fibers should sit fairly vertically. And now each turn of hackle goes immediately in front of the turn before it. And I'm looking to get 3 to 4 turns behind the wing, then come directly under the wing, and do another 3 in front, then sneak in with your thread and tie that off. Once you have that tied, come in, trim away the remainder of the hackle, and just stroke everything back and with a few turns of thread create your head. And then do a whip finish. When I'm working with small flies, I like to make this leg of the whip finish, I like to work with a very short length there. It allows me better control. And less goofy things can happen. I'll go ahead and throw in one more. And then also as I draw back with my whip finisher, I pull with my bobbin hand, I pull back towards the bend of the hook, and that helps make sure that the thread doesn't slip down onto the hook eye. Trim away your thread. Just double check your hackles. And there's your blue-winged olive. So there you have it. There's a blue-winged olive. Tie up a bunch of these, have a bunch of them in your fly boxes from sizes 14 down to 22, and guarantee you're going to get hits on them. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and look forward to seeing you out on the water.